The interior of the Stag and Bull was deceptively massive, far larger than the modest storefront suggested. Rich red and gold banners draped heavily from the thick wooden rafters, each one meticulously hand-sewn with a strange emblem, a polished shield bearing a central circle with a single vertical line running straight down its front. To Rian, it looked unnervingly like a slitted, unblinking eye. To his left, the tavern's long bar counter was a blur of activity. A man and a woman worked in tandem behind the polished wood, pouring drinks and exchanging rapid chatter with a dense crowd of patrons. Behind them rested rows of countless glass bottles, glinting in a chaotic variety of geometric shapes, vibrant colors, and mysterious contents. To his right, a wide wooden staircase swept upward to an overhanging secondary floor cluttered with additional tables and chairs. Despite the underlying strangeness, the tavern felt undeniably cozy, saturated with a sweet roasting aroma that hung pleasingly in the air. Zarek moved through the crowded floor with surprising ease, gently nudging patrons aside as he beckoned Rian forward. As they walked, Rian felt a heavy sensation press against the back of his neck, the distinct, uncomfortable impression of dozens of pairs of eyes plastering themselves to his back. When they reached the counter, Zarek snapped his fingers sharply. A moment later, the female bartender slid smoothly over to their side. "What can I get you two young gentlemen?" she asked, wiping down the wood with a rag. "Young? Oh, I like you, my dear," Zarek chuckled, leaning against the bar. "I'll have my usual. And for the young chap here, well, I guess you can't quite remember what your usual is, can ya?" Rian shook his head silently. He was utterly transfixed by the vibrant tapestry of the room, the bustling rush of bodies, the low hum of men and women locked in animated conversation, the thick ribbons of pipe smoke curling toward the ceiling. The raw energy of a good time felt almost infectious, warming the cold anxiety in his chest. "I shall have whatever you are having," Rian spoke up. "Good boy," Zarek replied, a knowing glint in his eye. "Although you might just regret saying that." The old man reached deep into the heavy folds of his brown rags, pulling out 2 copper pieces and dropping them into the bartender's palm. Without thinking, Rian's right hand automatically twitched, dropping down toward the right side of his waist where a coin pouch traditionally should have been. The sheer reflex of the movement startled him. His physical body remembered a lifetime of muscle memory that his mind could no longer access. "I'm sorry, I don't have—" Rian began, his hand freezing over his empty hip. "These are entirely on me, young man," Zarek cut him off smoothly, grabbing 2 iron goblets filled with a fizzy dark brown liquid. "Didn't expect you to pay a single copper. Now, come on, let's find a table, preferably somewhere quiet." Zarek passed one of the heavy goblets to Rian and began weaving toward the staircase. Rian lifted the vessel, staring down at it. Somehow, his fingers had automatically wrapped around the metal handle with perfect, practiced balance, even if his brain couldn't explain how. For an older man, Zarek was remarkably spry. He practically bounded up the wooden steps, taking them 2 at a time. Rian followed at a much more deliberate pace, careful not to spill the sloshing liquid. "Sorry, sir," Rian murmured, as his shoulder lightly grazed a patron sitting near the railing. The man merely offered a low, guttural grunt in response, keeping his back turned. As Rian reached the top landing, a low murmur drifted through the ambient noise, slipping into his ears. "Oi, look, there's that weird fellow." Instinctively, Rian turned his head toward the source of the whisper. He expected to catch the speakers looking away or pretending to be locked in mid-conversation, but to his surprise, the 2 men sitting at the corner table were staring point-blank at him. Their eyes were wide, vacant, and locked straight into his. They didn't blink. They didn't flinch. They simply stared. "Are you coming, boy?" Zarek's voice cut through the air, instantly breaking the unsettling staring match. Rian tore his gaze away and hurried into a small, shadowed enclave built directly into the tavern's stone wall. It featured plush, padded leather benches, capable of seating at least 4 people. Zarek had already made himself thoroughly comfortable, having already downed a third of his draft. Rian squeezed into the opposite side, sitting flat against the cushions. He swirled the brown liquid in his goblet, casting a lingering, paranoid glance back toward the stairs. "Try it, go on," Zarek urged, gesturing with his cup. Hesitantly, Rian lifted the rim to his lips, letting a few dark drops roll over his tongue. The liquid was thick and remarkably sweet, yet highly drinkable. Initially, it felt crisp and refreshing, but as he took a larger gulp, a bizarre sensation washed over him. The drink felt entirely hollow, as if beneath the initial rush of sugar, it possessed no real flavor or substance at all. "Right then," Zarek said, setting his drink down with a soft click. "I promised I'd help you fill in whatever gaps you want to know, or at least the little I do know. How about I start by telling you exactly where we are, eh?" Rian nodded, sliding his goblet to the side and leaning his forearms onto the table, drawing closer. "We are currently sitting in the Stag and Bull within the lovely city of Nostrador," Zarek explained proudly. "Lived here all my miserable life, as I believe you have too." Rian's focus sharpened. "When I woke up earlier, you mentioned checking in on the rest of my company, the soldiers who brought my body back. What exactly did you mean by that?" Rian looked away, the terminology tasting foreign in his mouth. "My company." "My company? Do you mean I led them?" he asked. "Course you did," Zarek barked with a wide grin. "You're a great wee general to the troops, the absolute best in the region, from what I hear." A general. The grand title echoed in Rian's mind, feeling entirely massive and heavy on his tongue. Yet deep down, a desperate, vulnerable part of his fractured psyche desperately wanted it to be true. He wasn't just a wandering ghost. He was someone of note, someone of profound worth and structural meaning. He gripped the iron goblet with both hands and took a massive swig. "Can I see them?" Rian asked, a sudden surge of enthusiasm breaking through his grogginess. "Can I go talk to my company?" Instantly, Zarek's demeanor shifted. The old man dropped his head, his gaze suddenly fixating entirely on the grain of the wooden table. He seemed deeply hesitant, his jaw tightening beneath his snowy beard. Rian waited, the sudden silence stretching thin. "So, can we? It doesn't have to be right now, but soon?" Zarek didn't stir. A thick, suffocating wave of tension began to mount between them, but Rian couldn't fathom the cause. It was a simple, logical inquiry. If his men had tragically died after bringing his broken body back across the lines, he simply wanted to know the truth. This forced silence was cutting far deeper into his amnesia than necessary. "Zarek," Rian said, his voice dropping into a firm, commanding register. Zarek finally snapped his head up, blinking rapidly. "Ah, my apologies, son. Completely zoned out there must be the strength of the draft, right?" He let out a forced, awkward laugh, quickly lifting his goblet and downing the remaining contents to cover his tracks. "Can you answer my question, please?" Rian pressed abruptly, refusing to let the deflection slide. Zarek exhaled a heavy sigh, his lips parting to speak, but the wooden floorboards creaked loudly as the female bartender suddenly popped up the stairs, arriving directly at their table. "Everything good up here, you two?" she asked cheerfully. "Can I fetch you anything else to drink?" "You hungry, son?" Zarek deflected instantly, turning to Rian. The bartender chimed in immediately, her eyes locking onto Rian's frame. "Surely you must be. Someone of your massive stature must need, 4 or 5 heavy meals a day just to stay strong? I bet that's exactly what the rest of your men do, right?" Zarek shot a sharp warning glare at the woman, and she returned it with a cold, knowing look of her own. For a prolonged, unnecessary moment, the two shared a tense, silent exchange before the bartender abruptly broke eye contact. "I'll leave you to it then," she said flatly, snatching Zarek's empty goblet and wandering back down the stairs. "Anyway," Zarek sighed, leaning back into the booth, "before we were so rudely interrupted, I'm sure you're overwhelmingly anxious. Must be wondering if you have a family, friends, a lovely partner hidden away somewhere, eh?" He offered a clumsy wink, snorting out a small laugh. Rian interjected, pointing a finger directly toward the thick linen wrapping his skull. "Actually, can you tell me exactly what happened to my head? Who did this to me?" "Ah, well, you were brutally injured on the field of battle, from what I gathered," Zarek replied, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. "Covered in blood, you were. Dastardly things did a real number on you. I can tell you that much for free." "Things? What things?" Rian demanded, his patience thinning. He wanted a straight, unvarnished truth. "Well, the elves, of course. Who else would attack a fine man of Nostrudor? The word struck a chord. Elves. Rayon's mind flashed back to the infirmary, to Sigurd's venomous hatred and the drunkard's remarks about big-eared creatures. The puzzle pieces were slowly slotting into a grim, coherent picture. "Elves," Rian whispered. "They did this to me? Did we at least get them back?" "Of course we did, son. When I saw you go down out there, I truly feared the worst," Zarek said, his voice rising with dramatic flair. "I saw one of those pointy-eared bastards looming right over you. A massive brute it was. One of them broadsword types." Zarek gestured vaguely in the air, mimicking a grand swing. "Nearly had your head clean off, too. It went to finish you, but your men rallied and killed the beast right where it stood. We had to carry you all the way back to the gates on our shoulders. God, what a grand sight that must have been to the townsfolk." Rian paused, his brow furrowing as he parsed the words. "You were there? I thought you said my men were the ones who brought me back alone." An immediate suffocating silence fell over the enclave. Zarek's eyes widened slightly, his hands fidgeting against his rags. Aye," Zarek stammered hastily, his voice catching. "They did the heavy lifting, of course. But I, too, was out there on the fringes, helping guide them. Took you straight to the medicus myself, I did." Something fundamentally did not add up. Rayon stared at the old man, a cold bead of sweat rolling down his neck. Every piece of information he received felt as though it were being served with a heavy pinch of salt, shifting and changing under the slightest scrutiny. "I guess I should be thanking you, then," Rayon replied slowly, forcing a tight, hollow smile across his face. "No need at all, boy. We all watch each other's backs in Nostrudor. Trust me," Zarek said. Trust. The word felt laughably weightless. How could Rayon trust a single soul when he had only regained consciousness an hour ago? He was stranded in a world populated by aggressive, overly helpful strangers, sitting across from an old man whose stories were riddled with blatant inconsistencies. But as he looked around the tavern, he realized he had no other choice. "Okay," Rian said, leaning back. "So, if hypothetically I wanted to get back to the fighting, what is my next step?" A massive, proud smile split Zarek's face, his white whiskers stretching out far past his cheeks. "Now we are talking. Follow me, lad." He leapt up from the table with that same unnatural spryness, immediately heading for the stairs. "Where are we going now?" Rian called out, sliding out of the booth. "You'll see. Come on." Another vague answer. Great, Rian thought bitterly, but he followed regardless. As they approached the tavern exit, Zarek waved a grand, theatrical goodbye to the room. Rian turned back to glance at the bar one last time, and a chill ran down his spine. Every single patron in the establishment had stopped what they were doing. Their faces were turned entirely toward the doorway, their hollow eyes plastered to Rayon's silhouette as he exited into the street. They must have stayed inside the Stag and Bull far longer than Rayon realized. The blinding midday sun had entirely vanished, replaced by a thick, unnatural haze of deep purple and blood red that saturated the late afternoon sky. Zarek adjusted the heavy folds of his brown robes, glancing down both ends of the cobblestone street. "This way, lad." He took a sharp right, navigating the uneven stones. Rayon hurried to keep pace. The thoroughfares were significantly busier now, packed with crowds of citizens moving with frantic purpose. Yet, as Rayon watched them navigate the narrow streets, he noticed a horrifying commonality. Every single person possessed a completely emotionless blank stare, their eyes fixed firmly on the air directly in front of them. A rushing pedestrian shouldered past Rian with immense force, sending him twisting sideways into a figure walking immediately behind him. "Sorry," Rian exclaimed instinctively, steadying himself. There was no reaction. The person didn't even slow down. However, as the stranger pushed past into the fog, Rayan's eyes locked onto the garment they wore. A massive green cloak, embroidered with brilliant gold thread along its lower hem. The golden stitching climbed up the center of the fabric, expanding beautifully into the distinct shape of a grand, sprawling tree. The visual hit Rayan like a physical blow to the chest. It didn't spark a specific memory, but it pulled at something incredibly deep, ancient, and buried within his soul. A profound wave of warmth and familiarity washed over him, completely unexplainable, before the cloaked figure melted into the faceless gray crowd. I couldn't imagine losing my memories. It's truly heartbreaking, for sure, Zarek spoke up, turning back to face him as they walked. Rian pressed his palms against his temples, the phantom throb returning. I just wish I could remember something of actual note. It's getting to the point of utter frustration. Maybe once you've got a proper sword back in your hand, it'll all come flooding back, Zarek cheered, slicing his arm through the air like a blade. Yeah, maybe. They walked through the maze of stone structures for another 10 minutes before Zarek turned sharply down a set of steep stone steps, leading them into a sunken, heavily fortified courtyard. The chaotic noise of the city died away, replaced by the crisp, ordered atmosphere of military life. Heavy iron guardsmen lined each side of the perimeter. Rian looked around, the stone walls rising high above them. An armory, he said aloud, the word instantly populating in his mind. Yes, well done, General, Zarek chuckled. The rhythmic sounds echoed off the masonry, the sharp clack of training wooden swords, the distinct high-pitched twang of a bowstring being released, the heavy metallic clang of a blacksmith's hammer shaping iron and steel. The symphony of war resonated deeply within Rian's chest. He suddenly became aware that his palms were sweating, his heart accelerating with an intense biological anticipation. Zarek stopped near the bottom of the stairs, catching his breath. Go on, lad, just through there. He pointed his wrinkled finger toward a set of massive double wooden doors barred with a heavy iron barricade. I'll catch up in a moment. These old bones, you know how it is. Rian left the old man behind, his pace quickening as he approached the entrance. Before he could reach the handles, a guard stepped forward, dropping a long iron spear across his chest. Oi, you got permission to be here? The guard barked, his face hidden beneath a heavy steel helm. Rian looked back over his shoulder. Zarek was standing by the stairs, watching them intently. The old man gave a sharp, authoritative wave of his hand. The guardsman looked from Zarek back to Rian. He offered a low grunt, lifted the heavy iron barricade, and gently pushed the massive door open. Inside lay a dimly lit, cathedral-like chamber. Stone slabs lined the floor and walls, illuminated by roaring iron braziers that let off occasional, spitting hisses of embers. Long wooden tables cluttered with heavy iron chests lined the perimeter. Rian stepped inside, the heavy doors closing softly behind him. Ahem. Do I know? Wait. A voice drifted from the shadows to his right. A man sitting behind a desk slowly rose to his feet, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief. I don't believe it, sir. You're up and about. The man stepped forward, his arms twitching as if he wanted to pull Rian into a massive hug, but seeing Rian's tense, guarded posture, he quickly lowered his limbs, looking thoroughly dejected. You don't recognize me, do you, sir? Don't take it personally, Rian replied softly, his eyes wandering across the weapons racks. I don't remember much of anything right now. He moved away from the man, heading toward a long table to his left. I'm Garth, sir. I was one of the men on the field with you when you fell, Garth said, lowering his eyes to the floor. Rian stopped before the table. Resting upon the dark wood was a beautifully crafted longsword. It featured a sleek black leather grip, and the hilt was adorned with a thin, polished metal cylinder. Carved deeply into the pommel was that same familiar emblem, the shield with the unblinking eye. Rian reached out, his fingers wrapping around the leather grip. He lifted the weapon. Instantly, the weight distributed flawlessly across his arm. It felt entirely correct, like an extension of his own body. Ah, it is so good to see you still remember how to hold a blade, sir, Garth beamed. Rian turned back to face him, realizing with a jolt that his feet had automatically slid into a perfect low combat stance, balanced perfectly for a sword of this exact weight and length. He slowly lowered the tip of the steel toward the floor, relaxing his posture. Zarek told me to come here, Rian said, keeping his eyes locked onto Garth's expressions. Can you help me? I would be deeply honored, sir. I wager you'll be wanting your actual gear back first. My gear? Yes, I've got it stored safely in one of these chests. I'm certain of it. Let me just... here we go. Garth strode over to a heavy iron locker nestled beneath the weapon table. It was roughly the length of the longsword, but significantly deeper. He hauled it up onto the table with a grunt and beckoned for Rian to return the training blade. "I had it all thoroughly cleaned for you, right after we brought you back," Garth said, his tone incredibly friendly, though Rian noted bitterly that everyone in the city seemed entirely too friendly. Garth unclasped the heavy iron locks on the front of the chest and swung the lid backwards. As the lid cleared, Rian's eyes caught a sudden blinding flash of vibrant green and gold fabric resting within the chest, a perfect visual echo of the tree cloak he had seen in the streets. He blinked, shaking his head, and the image instantly dissolved. The fabric within the chest was a dull, dark gray. Nestled inside the iron container was a complete kit: laced brown, knee-high leather boots, a sturdy leather-reinforced vest, a dark gray cloak, and a longsword nestled in a matching scabbard that shimmered softly under the brazier light, casting a faint golden hue around its edges. Rian noticed that Garth wore a nearly identical gray cloak. "These are mine?" Rian asked, running a hand over the leather. "Yep, all yours, sir. There should be a proper belt in there, too, somewhere near the bottom. I'll leave you to change in peace. Come find me out front when you're through." The enthusiastic soldier marched to the main doors, knocked 3 times, and exited as the heavy iron bolts scraped open and shut. Rian stared down at the equipment. It was his. Finally, a tangible piece of his own identity. He kicked off the tattered shoes Sigrid had given him and laced up the sturdy brown boots. He pulled the heavy leather vest over his green tunic, wrapped the dark gray cloak securely about his broad shoulders, and buckled the black leather belt around his waist, sliding the scabbard into place. "I'm ready," he thought, though a hollow voice in his mind asked, "Ready for what?" Scanning the armory, he noticed a smaller archway leading into a side room. He stepped through, finding a storage alcove lined with wooden mannequins, some draped in heavy iron plate armor, others standing bare. Weapon plaques displaying iron shields and battle axes lined the stone walls. In the far corner, standing tall against the masonry, was a large, rectangular structure with a polished, reflective surface that caught the flickering firelight. A mirror. Rian realized it was finally time. With no doctors or strangers surrounding him to block his view, he could finally see his own face and inspect the true damage done to his skull. He strolled over to the glass, standing tall in his new leather gear. He stared at the reflection. The face staring back felt like an absolute stranger. He possessed chiseled, sharp features, dark eyes, a light dust of stubble along his jawline, and remarkably pale skin. He reached up, his fingers catching the rough knot of the linen bandages wrapped around his forehead. "I am sure Sigrid will absolutely love me for what I am about to do," he muttered to the empty room. With both hands, he took hold of the linen edges just above his eyes and gently pulled. He closed his eyes, bracing for a flare of agony, but as the cloth unraveled and fell away, he felt nothing but a cool rush of air. He opened his eyes. Locks of thick brown hair fell forward over his brow and behind his ears. A profound sense of physical relief washed over him, but his eyes immediately darted to the left side of his temple. A small patch of hair had been shaved away. In its place lay a tightly packed line of dark stitches closing a deep, vicious laceration that was stained a nasty red and purple. It was healing, but highly vulnerable. However, as Rian leaned closer to the glass, his breath caught in his throat. The head wound wasn't what caught his attention. He pushed his hair back, looking closely at his ears. Running along the absolute top rim of his left ear was a tiny, precisely stitched cut. He frowned, turning his head to inspect his right ear. To his absolute horror, a perfectly identical stitched slit ran along the top rim of the right ear as well. Why would a random battlefield accident cause identical, symmetrical cuts on the tops of both ears? Why did it look as though the skin had been deliberately sliced and altered? He reached up, his trembling fingers hovering just millimeters away from the mysterious stitches, when the heavy outer doors of the armory suddenly rattled violently. "Get out here and show us how you look, boy!" Zarek's booming voice echoed through the stone archway. Rian snapped his hands down, resting his right palm firmly on the pommel of his sheathed sword. He took a deep breath, composed his features, and marched back out into the main armory chamber. Garth caught sight of him first, his face immediately lighting up with immense, subordinate pride. He looked exactly like a soldier seeing his general restored to glory. Zarek, however, didn't look at the armor. His sharp, dark eyes went directly to Rian's exposed forehead, staring intently at the bare stitches and the missing bandages. "I see you've taken the liberty of removing your own dressings," Zarek muttered, his tone unreadable for a split second before his jovial mask slid back into place. "Ah, well, as long as you feel fine, that's all that truly matters. But hey, look at you. It's as if nothing ever happened to you, Rian." "Thank you. I do feel much better," Rian replied, his voice steady as he ran a hand over the leather vest. "And before you say anything, yes, this gear actually does feel familiar." "I bet you're absolutely dying to use that steel again," Zarek snorted, nodding toward the longsword. Garth nodded vigorously in agreement. "Well, first things first," Rian said, stepping toward the main table, channeling the general they claimed he was. "We need to plan. Was there anything written down regarding our last departure, Garth? Any new intelligence from the front lines I should be made aware of?" Garth blinked, suddenly looking incredibly uncomfortable. He shot a rapid, panicked glance over at Zarek, then looked back at Rian, his hands fidgeting. "Sir, I get it. You want to get right back to your normal routine, but haven't the healers explicitly told you not to?" "I am perfectly fine, Garth," Rian cut him off, his voice carrying a sudden, icy authority that surprised even himself. "If the boy says he's fine, then he is damn well fine," Zarek chimed in loudly, clapping his hands together with a wide grin. "I mean, just look at the lad. Our young general seems entirely fit and ready to get right back at it. And you are quite right, Rian. We need to forge a plan of sorts." Garth exhaled, stepping forward and placing a reassuring hand upon Rian's leather-clad shoulder. "I'll call in the rest of the guard command, then. Head upstairs, you two. Once the officers are fully gathered in the briefing room, we can create a brand new plan of attack." "Good," Rian nodded. As he turned toward the stairs, a strange sense of comfort settled over him. Finally, he had a concrete plan, a definitive purpose. Even in a city of lies and whispers, the battlefield was something he knew how to navigate.